Well, again, welcome. Glad you made it this morning. This is the time of year where the Chinese send us things to blow our fingers off with. It's interesting how that works. It's another kind of trade war. So, lots of things going on at Trinity, as you know. And here's some announcements for you.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. We would especially like to welcome our guests. You can let us know you're here today by filling out the blue connection card in your worship folder or on the Trinity app. Later in the service, you can drop that card in the offering basket. In your worship folder, you'll find the upcoming events and announcements that we want you to hear about, like the Women's Beauty Boot Camp on Tuesday. If you're a guest, be sure to stop by our guest services table in the lobby and get a free gift. It's just our way to let you know we're glad you joined us today. If you want to get connected with us, you can visit us online or through the Trinity app. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Okay, so what do the guys have that's like a beauty boot camp? It's like a scruffy man camp. I don't know what you'd call that. So this is kind of like youth group today. Fads bring in the message, just like youth group. We're not going to shoot any candy cannons or anything like that. It's not going to be quite so exciting. I know, sorry. But there's a video you should watch about the missions trip, and here it is.
My favorite part was I think at the work site when I got to be the leader. I wasn't the best leader or anything, but I learned how to lead through things I've never done before.
Stepping back as a leader and letting other people grow and lead the team and not trying to take over, because that's my natural instinct is to run everything and be in control. So stepping back, allowing people to grow and lead.
Probably stepping up as a leader. Sometimes I didn't know what I was doing, so I would definitely have to ask for help.
I asked for God to give me the strength and the wisdom to be a leader, because the next day I was going to be a leader at the work site.
I think God brought me on this trip because He wanted a bunch of us to go and get experience being leaders and taking next steps and learning new skills to bring back to our youth group and church and take it to the next level.
It was pretty awesome to get to know different kids and know their culture.
It was just really fun seeing them light up when we talked about Jesus.
Seeing the smiles on all the kids' faces, that's the best part.
Seeing the little kids play and have fun, getting to know them too was fun.
This little boy named Jerrison, I got to know really well on the trip. We all gave him soccer balls, all the kids, when they left. So he wanted me to sign his name, and when they were leaving in the vans, everyone loaded him up. So he had a soccer ball, and I was waving to him, and he had it, and he held it up to my name, and then he flipped it around to his name and gave me a thumbs up.
And it was really hard to leave them because I got to know them so well and their personalities.
It's really completely not what we're used to, and there's trash everywhere, and there's no grass, and it's not very comfortable, and it's really hot, and the houses themselves are they're not in that great of shape.
Some people live in these little hogan things, and it's just one room for 5 people. It's just a lot that they have to share.
The houses I lived in were a surprise. They're not houses, they're literally shacks.
And we saw the houses that they lived in. I just felt my heart kind of dropped. And it was shocking because we have these nice houses here and we can take 45-minute showers, but they're on water conservation and they can only take 2-minute showers once a week, and it's just crazy.
it's a treat for kids to get water, so they can just keep drinking the water over and over and over again.
Then I asked them what their favorite drink was, and one of them said water because she didn't get to drink it very often, and so I felt like I took lots of things for granted because she was like happy drinking this water that we were complaining tasted horrible, and she was just happy she got to drink it.
It was just really sad knowing that there's people in our country, like just a couple states away, that are still living in the poverty.
I think it was just really surprising how like they were just so like happy even though they had hardly anything.
We don't realize how like much stuff we have, and we aren't even grateful.
It's really like hit home when I saw that, because I always like, try to be content with what I have, but these kids are just totally happy with what they have, and they're making the most of it.
I felt really connected to God during our morning prayer sessions, and I found a new love for praying and journaling in the morning, and I have kept doing that since the trip, and it's been really cool to look back and see, oh, God answered my prayer request that way, and every day. It's pretty cool.
I used to like never pray or never do anything like I should have, and then over this trip I learned like what praying all the time could do.
I could always just go to God or pray or ask for help from others on the team.
During the morning devos, I felt really connected to God because it was just like a one-on-one time with Him, and I got to like just write down my thoughts or prayers.
Every time we worshiped, it was just like everyone was singing, and everyone was just I don't know, it just felt really like everyone was connected to God, and God was really working.
Everyone was just had their eyes closed or their hands out, and it was just a really powerful moment.
I feel like my burdens were just lifted off my shoulders, and I was able to keep my #1 focus on God.
I feel like God brought me on this trip to grow my faith in God.
A moment I really felt connected to God was when I was sharing my Bible story during VBS with a bunch of kids about Jesus walking on water and how we can put our trust in Jesus, and He'll always be there to catch us.
The most challenging part of the trip for me was probably getting the confidence to talk about God and sharing my story, because I don't really know if it's going to be like acceptable or not, because I haven't had a really challenging story.
I learned how to talk in front of a group of people better than I probably would have before, and learning how to speak to people even though you don't want to most of the time.
The best moment for me was probably looking at the work site and seeing everyone working hard, and then the next day getting up, going back to the work site, and it all being done.
It took us like 2 days to get this retaining wall done, and when we just finally got the first layer done, it was like, it just relieved everyone's stress.
Probably just working as a team was good, bonding, and just having discussions after team time and stuff.
I feel like just working together and living in tight quarters definitely bonded us all together.
The teamwork and compassion that I saw on this trip, and a lot of people changed before and after the trip, was really awesome. And just getting to know other people on the trip that I really didn't know before was really cool too.
I think God brought me on this trip to teach me that like He's still there for me, and that the people at church are there for me, and that I'm not like as alone as I thought I was because of a thing I was going through. We kind of had like a prayer circle, I guess, where like everyone put their hand on me and helped pray about this thing that was really bothering me. After the prayer and after I had talked to people, it really, really helped a lot, and it made me feel a lot safer to the people that I was with and like closer to God, and that I knew that everything was going to be okay. And so that definitely was like my favorite part after we'd prayed.
We came together as a team and loved on her and encouraged her and helped her through this issue. And it was really awesome to see the team come together and focus on one person. And I think it really showed what the church and what a team can do if they just all focus on one thing and love on something.
What do you think about that? Yeah. I am so proud of this team and this church. I mean, you guys for helping send them. That's fantastic. Proud of them, and I mean them too. They are the church. And it's so awesome to see them take their next steps. I can't think of one thing as we were praying and thinking about what we wanted this missions trip to accomplish. I can't think of one goal or prayer request that we had out there that God didn't meet and exceed in really incredible ways. So really, really, really proud of them. That's so good. That's so good to see. When we were there, we saw a group of people. We were working on the Navajo Indian, there's the Navajo Nation, and we worked with a particular group of people. And as we were talking to people there, we worked most directly with the church, which was fantastic. A lot of our work project was on site there, and so we're helping the church. And they're really the best able to help the community, more than we could in that week. They have a long existing relationship with the people. So it was a fantastic way for us to go in and help really the big hitter in the area. One of the nights that we were there, we were talking with the church, and the church leaders were just helping us understand about the community. The pastor there, Eugene, he said, these people are really refugees, is what they are. And started to help us to understand how they're in the condition that they're in. Now, as we drove around, there wasn't really any cities that we saw that were close together. There was just houses that were randomly placed all over the place. And we were just having a hard time understanding how this could be. And Eugene helped us to understand that really at some point in time in the 70s, some people came in. I believe he said the government came in and took the coal that was underneath their land. And so they got redistributed throughout this area. And some of them were built houses. They're given a government check as long as they stay on the reservation, and they can just stay there. A lot of these houses don't have water, pretty beaten down, run down. We noticed that there wasn't very much employment in the area. And as we talk to people, they say, yeah, I'm the guy who just fixes trucks. That's what I do. I go around and I just work on other people's vehicles. And they together as a community would kind of take care of one another's needs. But because there wasn't a lot of jobs and not really any cities or availability to income, one of the people in the church told us that the highest thing that the people struggle with there is alcoholism and depression. You can imagine in that kind of environment, it's kind of defeating. And we as people, all of us, we're made for a purpose. We're made to do something. And so if we don't have something to do, then that tends to not be good. Alcohol, drugs, unemployment. As we were driving through the capital of Navajo Nation, Window Rock, I saw the largest juvenile detention center that I've ever seen. And just a comment to that, there's a lot of really, really big problems in this area. Now, this specific issue, do you ever just get overwhelmed by some of the issues that our world faces? I mean, there's so many of them these days that it's easy to just kind of get anesthetized to them, right? There's so many big-ticket issues that it's hard to even know how to make any difference, how to move forward. This is just one. I can remember at one point in time where God really just completely crushed my heart because I became aware of just what was happening in the world with human trafficking. This was just a few years ago. We took a missions team down to Salem, and as we were there, they showed us this converted coffee shop. The coffee shop before that was a bar, and the bar had been converted so that minors who were coming in off the street, they would tell them the police were coming. They would go through this door and run down this little tunnel and then get dropped into a room, and then now they're in the system. This was just a couple of blocks, literally, from the state capitol. And then I started to understand that Seattle is the third largest port for human trafficking. And we just think these problems are out there, but they're here. And my heart was crushed. I remember one time, Anne-Marie and I, we were thinking about this, and after watching a movie that was talking about some heavy things, we just sat there and thought, how in the world could we ever have anything to do with solving these problems? Even just this one issue, what could we do to solve this? It's just too big. Do you ever feel defeated in that way? After a while of wrestling with it, the weight started to lift it, and I started to go back, and I started to think, wait. God is still God. That hasn't changed. And God, this isn't a secret to God. He knows that there's these problems in the world. And then I got a really clear focus, and that was that I may not be called to wipe out human trafficking or the injustices in the Navajo Nation or the other things that we see as big-ticket problems in the world. I may not be the one who's in charge of taking that out, but I do have the ability to do what God has gifted me to do, and that is to love Him and love the few people that are around me and help them to love Him and love the people around them. I believe that that is God's plan for the world as the church to affect these issues. Well, we're in a series called Wildfire, and this is the idea that when the church does what it's supposed to do, it's wild, it's beautiful, it's powerful, it's dangerous. This scene behind me, you can see, is set up wildfire. It's beautiful and terrifying all at the same time. And there's an idea there, and especially we see this in the book of Acts, where the early church got it, and it's beautiful and powerful and wild. And there's a lot of things to learn there from that book. If you're going to understand the book of Acts, then I think you got to understand this idea. The concept of the church is unified in one purpose. Okay, now I can't believe the other pastors let me take this nugget, because I think you can't really understand the book of Acts if you don't understand this. Okay, so nerd alert, we're going to talk about Greek just for a second. I only know like 7 Greek words. This is one of them. Homothumadon. All right, say it with me, homothumadon. All right, thank you very much. Homothumadon is not a dinosaur in the new Jurassic Park movie. It is this idea. It's of one mind, rushing along in unison. It's really 2 words put together, rushing along in unison. Homothumadon, okay? And of the 12 times that this word is used in the New Testament, 10 of them are used in the book of Acts. A lot of if you think of the book of Acts and you're familiar with that book, if you think of a lot of the times where you say, wow, the church really got it right, it's somewhere in proximity to this word where the church was rushing along in unison of one mind and one purpose. They were getting it right. And I would go even further and say their clarity, the church really got this, and say, wait a minute, everything that's ever been done in history, it's all been pointing towards Jesus. And now Jesus died and He established the church, and now as the church, this is what we do. We're all about Jesus. We're about loving God and loving people, and that's what the rest of history is going to do, is to be pointing to Jesus. That's what it's all about. And that's where the church was getting it right. Well, today we're actually going to jump out of the book of Acts into another story where I think a group of people also got it right. They got one clarity of purpose and focus and mission. We're going to be in the book of Nehemiah today. Okay, so if you've read this story before, then awesome. We're going to be talking about one of my favorites. If you haven't, I'm glad to be able to present a piece of it to you. The town of Jerusalem they've been exiled, they've been sent out around the world. They're starting to come back, but Jerusalem itself is in ruins. Okay, the community is struggling. It seems like people are facing a crisis of faith. And that's how things were. This is about 5th century BC or BCE, if you're into that thing. And either the people in this area, either they had lived in those conditions for so long that they no longer saw how things were bad anymore. They didn't see how bad things were. Or they'd lived there for so long that they couldn't imagine how anything would ever change. Isn't it funny how we look at the Bible and we look backwards in history and we think, those people are so silly. How did they get it wrong? But the thing is I think as we look at this book today, there's a lot of things that teach it. That's why it's in our Bibles, because those things teach us things today, right? And I think it's so easy for us to do the same thing. We can be in proximity to these big problems and think, it's too big, it can never change. You know, it's impossible to solve this issue. What could I do? And so we just give up. We stop imagining, we stop dreaming, we stop trying to do something, trying to do anything. On the surface, Nehemiah's story reaffirms the idea that we can do more together. As the church, we're better together. But I think there's also something else in here. I think that the story of Nehemiah implies that when we do something together, it has the potential to change how a generation sees God. Now, when I say a generation sees God, I mean there's people inside and outside of these walls that are looking to us as the church to see how we respond to this God that we say that we know, that we say that we love. There's a group of people who are watching us, and we have the potential to change how they have relationship with God. There's a lot of people watching this situation in Nehemiah's day, people inside and outside the walls, and people are watching and waiting to see what would happen. All right, so one of the things I love about Nehemiah, I love a lot of things about this story. Nehemiah was a doer, all right? Nehemiah, he was a man of action. He did stuff. He didn't just sit there, he did something. I got to tell you, our generation, the people that are around us, watching us, we need more doers in this world. There's a lot of talkers right now. Anybody get sick of politicians? Anyone? Nobody? Oh, okay. Facebook, man, there's a lot of talkers out there. And it's so easy for us to complain about stuff, right? It's really easy to complain. It's hard to stand up and just start doing something. All right, so what do we learn from Nehemiah? Number one, as we jump into the book, you got to name what's broken. Nehemiah 1:3. Nehemiah's story begins when someone shows up and gives him some bad news. Nehemiah is in Susa. He's working for King Artaxerxes, and a messenger stops by and gives him a candid report of what's happening in the land. And so he tells Nehemiah what's happening in his own hometown. He explains to him this, Nehemiah 1:3. Those who survived the exile are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. The town's in ruins. When Nehemiah heard this, his first response was to mourn, and then to fast and to pray. And for several days, this is what he did. He just sat in the knowledge that this place and his people, that they're in utter ruin. Nehemiah was showing us something important here, and it's easy to skip past this. So make sure that you get this. If we can't name what the problem is, then we can't fix the problem. If you don't know what the problem is, you don't know how to fix it. Sometimes we just need to assess the situation and be honest about what's broken. Nehemiah became aware that his hometown was in trouble. The city was in such poor condition that people were vulnerable in a number of ways. Their security and their safety were threatened. Their future existence was at stake. Every once in a while, I think we get bad news too. And we talked about, and we hear about these issues, and we don't know what to do about it. But I believe that what we do with these critical pieces of information, it in a way defines our character. How do we respond? Do we ignore it? Do we accept it? Do we say this is just the way that things are? Or do we get involved? I want to make a suggestion here. You don't have to agree with me, but here's something that I think. If our church ignores the problems that are happening in our community, we forfeit the right to influence our community. If you're taking notes, those are the fill-ins there. If our church ignores the problems that are happening in our community, then we forfeit the right to have influence in our community. When we ignore what's broken around us, we forfeit our credibility with those who know that we should know better. You ever run into those people? They're not Christians, but they know that Christians should act differently. And they're watching. Fortunately, Nehemiah didn't ignore what was broken. He didn't excuse it. He didn't sit back and just wait for a miracle to happen. You may not have noticed this before, but a miracle is not recorded in the book of Nehemiah. It's pretty miraculous what happens, but he didn't wait for a miracle. And I'd say there's something else to be said here. It's okay to expect a miracle, to expect God to show up, expect God to do big things. It's okay to expect that, but it's not okay to wait for it. Nehemiah didn't wait for God to tell him what to do. He didn't wait for a miracle. Check out his prayer. I love this. He apologizes to God for the disobedience of his people. We see this all throughout Scripture where key leaders, they accept the sins of other generations and other people as if it were their own. They really saw the problem as their own. They were part of it. And then he talks to God. He appears to remind God of his promises to the Jewish nation. And then his prayer starts to pick up this panicked tone. It almost increases at the end as he starts to realize, as he's talking to God, that God is calling him to action. It's as if he's saying, please, God, help me, because here I go. Nehemiah moved quickly because he knew there was a potential threat to the physical and spiritual lives of his people. It's interesting what Nehemiah says at the end of this first chapter. It's really easy to miss. After he heard the report, after he prayed, after he realized that he should do something, he makes this simple statement. We just skip past it. It seems so insignificant. But he starts with this: I was a cupbearer to the king. I don't know what the hierarchy of cupbearer is. Okay, I think it might be like commode cleaner, and then like floor sweeper, and then cupbearer. Like I really don't know what the hierarchy is here. But what is clear is he's saying, I didn't have the authority to do what happened next. I was just a cupbearer to the king. He's not a priest. He's not a spiritual leader of Jerusalem. His only job was really to just hold the cup for the king. And I think there's a powerful suggestion here, and that is that your profession has nothing to do with your responsibility as the church. The Bible calls Christians kingdom of priests. We are all the church. We are all members of the church. We all have the equal responsibility to do the jobs of the church, the job of the church. And Nehemiah is saying, I didn't have the responsibility to do what I did, but that didn't matter. I did it anyway. Friends, we're responsible to engage in a broken world. It's not because it's in our job description. It's because we are the church. We are God's people. We are the church. We are ambassadors for the Son of the living God. We represent the one who gave his life for all of humankind. We represent him. And we're the best chance that this world has to see who Jesus is. So let's do what we're called to do and do what he did. Now, Nehemiah, cupbearer to the king, taught us an important lesson about being God's people. There's times when what is happening in the world requires you to leverage whatever you have. So this is what we see in the next passage. You got to leverage whatever you have. You and I are called to leverage whatever we have: status, influence, resources, privilege, knowledge, connections, finances. Whatever we have, I believe God has given those things to us. And those are great gifts. But I believe because we are the church, we are called to leverage those resources for his purposes. That's what Nehemiah did. He risked his privilege, his position, his power, because his people were worth it. Then Nehemiah did something else. After he appealed to the king, he gathered resources for the people in Jerusalem, and then he left his comfort zone. He could have maybe possibly managed this project from afar, but he rolled up his sleeves and got his hands dirty, and he went. He left his comfort zone, and he started to do something. He had to see the situation up close and personal. I'd say, if you want to be the kind of leader that understands what's really going on in this world, that has lasting influence, then you need to go see for yourself. Now, when I say if you want to be the kind of leader, you might just brush that off. But again, I'd say if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you are called to be a leader. You're called to have influence in this world. So if you want to be the kind of leader that has lasting influence, then you really have to see up close and personal the problems of our world. Go see for yourself. Sometimes we just need to encourage one another to get out on the front lines. It's easy. We've got so much comfort. We've got so much stuff that can fill up our times, right? And it's so easy to just get distracted. And sometimes we need to lovingly encourage one another. Hey, get out there. Get around some people. See the issues. See the problems. I believe this. Proximity changes our perspective. The closer that you get to a problem, the more clarity you can see about that particular issue. When you have enough courage to go see for yourself, it'll change how you lead and how you speak and how you think. Think about this. The more of us that are close to brokenness, the more impact we'll have on our community. What if enough of us really captured this thought as the church, that we were called to make a difference? If we had the kind of clarity like Nehemiah had about his group of people, if we transferred that to us and thought, our people in this community need help. What if enough of us got close to families who have kids with special needs? Got close enough to people of a different color? People who don't share our same views? People who are marginalized? People who are below the poverty line? People who are hurt because of injustices? People who are facing impossible odds? If enough of us could get close to the issues of our community, then possibly we could get mobilized enough to do something about the problems in our community. Now, I got to tell you, this is my personal belief. I don't think it just applies to a few people. I think if you're really going to affect change, you've got to work with young people. I think that there's something that can be done for older people, but I think the most effective way to change this world is to work in the lives of young people. They're sponges. They want to know what you think. They watch how you act. They watch what you think and say and do. And I think if you really, really want the bang for the buck, I think you need to work with children and youth to affect change in our culture. And maybe that's just me, but I think it's a lot bigger than that. I think it's a very strong strategy. Here's what I would love to see. I'll just tell you, since I've got the stage and nobody's kicking me off. Here's what I think. I think we should make it a goal to put a healthy adult in the life of every kid that can show them who Jesus is. Give every kid an adult who will show them who Jesus is. That's what our community needs. You see, our community is full of kids who see brokenness everywhere that they look. It's in their neighborhood. It's in their school. It's in their homes. What if we, like Nehemiah, saw that our church was an opportunity to show these kids who Jesus is? I believe this: there's no substitute in a kid's life for a consistent leader. There's no substitute in a kid's life for a consistent leader. There's a generation. When I say generation, again, I'm talking about the people who are watching, inside and outside. They're sitting in the wings. They're the less mature. We are the more mature. They're waiting for us to respond to their needs. They want to know how close we'll get. They're watching to see how far the generation before them is willing to go. They're waiting to make a decision about who it is about this God that we serve. And I got to tell you, if we're not willing to get close to them, we're going to lose them. We'll just continue to grow old together, as many churches in America do. But we're going to lose our influence, and we're going to lose these kids. All right, so Nehemiah, his visionary speech wasn't that long. He said to the people of Jerusalem, "Jerusalem lies in ruins. Its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall." Very inspiring speech. And the people replied, "Let's start rebuilding." This is the easiest message ever. The Old Testament was written in Greek, but I'm sure if it wasn't, I'm sure that we would see a homothumadon show up here. In their response, they got one mind and one purpose and one action. They had clarity. There's a problem. We need to fix it. Let's do it. Check this out. This is an interesting group of volunteers that are building the wall. Perfume makers, jewelry designers, preachers, politicians, merchants, and a cupbearer are in the qualified workers. not probably who you'd pick to fix the wall. There was a lot of people who were doing something that they were not experts at doing. Sometimes you just have to do something that you don't know how to do. That's one of the reasons that I love Nehemiah is there were so many people who just did what needed to be done. Nehemiah didn't press pause and say, here's your number 2 pencil. Could you fill out this spiritual giftedness inventory? I need to see exactly where you fit on our org chart. There was no class to help everyone discover what their gifts and talents and passions were. And then there wasn't anybody who was standing around saying, I'm just waiting for God to really tell me where my area is. They didn't pray about whether or not they should do it. They prayed while they were doing it. And they didn't wait to learn how to do it. They learned to do it as they were doing it. Why? Because they knew their people were in great danger. Evil was outside the gate. Children were at risk. God's relationship for an entire generation was at stake. There was too much for them to risk to not do anything. Also, Nehemiah didn't say that it would be easy. He rallied them to do something hard, something difficult, something that required all of them to join together to accomplish. I'd like you to imagine, just for a minute, what it would look like in the hearts of a generation if our church looked like this. What if we believed our city was in danger? What if we believed our families and kids were in danger? What if we had amazing clarity on how to rush along together to solve this problem? One last thing I want to look at Nehemiah today. Nehemiah rallied this group at just the right time. It was during a turning point in the story. As you're going through the story, they're doing a good job, and then it hits this midpoint as they're rebuilding Jerusalem. They're halfway through the construction, and things start to unravel. Things get tough. People start getting tired. Everything starts to pile up at once. There's verbal attacks, there's threats, there's skepticism. The complaints are coming in. There's rumors. You can feel it's getting nasty. And then what Nehemiah did was genius. He rallied families and parents to assume a new level of responsibility. This is how he describes the scene. 4:13. Therefore, I stationed some people behind the lowest points of the wall at the exposed places, posting them by families, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. After I looked things over, I stood up and said to the nobles and the officials and the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember who the Lord is, who is great and is awesome. Fight for your families, for your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes. Can you imagine the emotion in this moment? This was not a militarily tactic sound for him to do. You don't put families in the weak spots. You put your best warriors. You certainly don't put your children there. Everybody is ready to give up. Nehemiah organizes them by their families and posts them in the gaps in the wall, and he says, hey friends, remember what you're fighting for. See, Nehemiah recasts the vision. It's no longer simply about fixing a broken city. It's no longer about what's best for the community. It's no longer about demonstrating who God is. This is about your sons and your daughters and your wives and your homes. Nehemiah is saying, hey, let's really be clear about what happens if we don't get on this mission. Another interesting fact is that when the parents and families stood in the gap, the enemies decided not to attack. Maybe what he did really was genius, because I can imagine that people will fight only so hard if they think, it's just a gap in the wall, no big deal. But when somebody has the resolution to understand, if I don't hold this gap, my family's at risk, there's suddenly a different thought about holding that spot in the wall, right? I believe this. If we can inspire every parent and every person to understand what's really at stake in our community for our kids, it'll change the future of our church and our community. Don't miss what Nehemiah did in this moment. Nehemiah leveraged the concern that parents have about their children's future and positions them as champions for their faith. Nehemiah made the parents the champions of the story. Now, there's no doubt about it. Throughout the book of Nehemiah, he's constantly pointing them to who God is, and God really is the hero of the story. But underneath that, Nehemiah does this amazing thing in setting parents up for the win. Think about this. When Nehemiah asked parents to stand in the gap, he sparked their emotional awareness about what was at risk. He woke them up. Wake up! Your parents, you parents, you got to wake up. Your kids are in danger. These kids around us, they're in danger. Wake up. He set them up to win. As leaders and parents, sometimes we miss this. We need to make sure that every parent sees our church as a place that will help them win. Check this out. Together, the people of Jerusalem rebuilt the walls and gates of the city in 52 days. Amazing. This was at the astonishment of the skeptics and the amazement of the leaders and families who were there, and possibly most importantly, to the wonderment of a generation of kids and teenagers who were sitting on the sidelines watching. Here's the three things that happened once the walls were rebuilt. Those outside the walls, those skeptics, they changed what they believed about God. Nehemiah in chapter 6, verse 16 says, when all of our enemies heard about this, the surrounding nations were afraid and lost their self-confidence because they realized that the work had been done was with the help of our God. Number two, those inside the walls changed how they listened to God. Nehemiah 8:3 says this, Ezra the priest opened the scriptures and he read aloud from daybreak till noon. He faced the square before the water gate in the presence of the men, the women, and others who could understand. And all the people listened attentively to the book of the law. All right, a couple things here. One, that is a really long church service. Daybreak to noon. I'm definitely going to be done before that. Two, I don't think that's the most interesting thing for them to read, the book of the law. But it changed how they were listening to God. They listened attentively. And I think this is because when you are a part of God's mission and you are in there and you know you're in the trenches and you're doing what God wants you to do, that creates inside of you a hunger for more of God. Number three, a generation changed how they worshiped God. Down in verse 17, there's a statement about how they worshiped God, and it says this. Now, before I read this, do you ever, I don't know about you, but do you notice, because the Bible sometimes it has kind of some older speech and it's historical and it looks back and it kind of sometimes seems devoid of emotion? All right, now, read this passage. From the days of Joshua, son of Nun, until that day, the Israelites had not celebrated like this. And there was great joy. There was very great joy. Now, if I was in the youth room, I'd probably be yelling right now. I don't want any of you to get mad at me, but wow, what a powerful statement. These people saw God do something really, really big, and they were part of it. And they were seeing inside and outside. There was all this effect that was going on around them. And they work together. They can change how a generation sees God. This is what Nehemiah teaches us. That's what we want for this church. There's no greater way to affect change than to help out with children or with youth. You have the opportunity to change a kid's understanding of who God is and leveraging what you have for Jesus. Let me finish with this. Church, we are better together into the world. We can do more together. Let's pray. Community, us the mission, the idea of how to solve these problems. God, give us clarity in how to work together to be your church, to represent your Son, Jesus Christ, to this world that desperately needs him. God, we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.